Hello, and welcome to the Project Elected podcast. Project Elect is a nonpartisan nonprofit whose goal is pretty simple. We want to get more Latter-day Saint women involved in public service. On this podcast, we interview amazing Latter-day Saint women who are involved in public service. Hi, my name is Audrey Perry-Martin. I'm the founder of Project Elect and the host of this podcast. I am here today with Erin Rider. She is running for Salt Lake County Mayor. I'm really excited to talk to her and learn a little bit more about her journey and why she's running for mayor. Erin, tell me a little bit about what brought you to this point where you're running for Salt Lake County Mayor, and then maybe a little bit about what the county mayor does.
Let me just give you the quick background. I grew up here in Salt Lake County, multi-generational Utah, and loved growing up in Salt Lake County. It's such an amazing place to live. And I went to school at BYU and studied business. Both my grandfathers were entrepreneurs and had started their own businesses, and I was very inspired by that. So I followed the same track and studied business with that emphasis in entrepreneurship. And after I graduated, I worked for a small startup here in Salt Lake. It was a healthcare startup, and it grew significantly in the time that I was there. And so by the time I left, I was a senior manager in their operations department, managing hundreds of agents between Salt Lake and Dallas, Texas, and just loved every minute of being there. Had fantastic colleagues, and it was a really great learning experience, especially because I graduated from BYU in 2008 in the middle of the recession, and finding good jobs at that time was hard. And so I was very grateful to end up in a place that turned out to be such an incredible professional opportunity. But I knew that I wanted to go back to school. And so the time came when I was ready to do that. And I decided to go back to Washington, D.C. and got my JD MBA degrees from Georgetown University. And that was also an incredible experience, very different culturally from where I had grown up, academically rigorous in every way, and really just loved that experience there. While I was there, I was able to work as a law clerk on the Senate Finance Committee when Orrin Hatch was chair. And then after I graduated, I wasn't quite ready to come back to Utah yet. So I had an opportunity to go up to Boston and work for a large law firm in Boston, and took that opportunity. But I got to Boston and pretty quickly realized that as much as I loved Boston, that was not where I wanted to stay. And I missed Utah. I missed the quality of life in Utah. I wanted to be closer to my family. So I ended up coming back to Utah in early 2019, had an opportunity to come back and work for a firm here in town through some contacts that I had made in law school, and jumped on that when the opportunity came up. And I've been working there ever since as a corporate attorney. So that's a little bit of my background and how I ended up back here. And in terms of running for office, politics was something that always interested me. It was always in the back of my mind, but it felt so overwhelming and so big and so scary that I just never legitimately thought I would actually do it. When I came back to Utah, there were a lot of things happening around the country and around the world. And it just felt like that time when I thought, if I'm ever going to do this, I need to figure out what I'm doing, and I need to jump into this and prepare myself for the right opportunity. I had an opportunity come up to get on the board of Utah Women Run, which is an incredible organization that helps train women to run for office, very much like what Project Elect does. I jumped on that, got to know a lot of amazing women through that opportunity. I'm still on the board there, and just got involved in some community projects here in town, some volunteer opportunities. I jumped on everything that came my way. I just felt compelled to get involved and to be involved in my community and to find a way to give back. And if Utah was going to be my home, if Salt Lake County was going to be my home, I wanted to invest and really dive in and make the community a better place. And through all of that, kind of had this opportunity to run for office. And it's scary to jump in. It's scary to take that leap of faith, but sometimes you feel compelled to do something. And especially at the county level, there are a lot of issues at the county level right now that need to be addressed, that are not being addressed. And it was the right time, and I decided to jump in. So you asked what the county mayor does. Let me give you a brief synopsis of that. So a lot of people don't realize that we have a county mayor and a county council in Salt Lake County. Up until about the year 2000, we had a county commission, like most other counties. In 1999, 2000, the county voted to change that structure to a mayor-council form of government instead of a commission. So now we have a mayor and a 9-person council. Every person who lives in Salt Lake County gets to vote for the mayor and the county council. So you don't have to live in unincorporated county land to vote for the mayor. Everybody votes for the mayor and the council, just like you would for a county commission. The mayor in particular is the CEO of the county. The mayor is responsible for setting the budget of the county, responsible for managing a lot of the day-to-day operations of the county, and for working with the other independent elected officials like the council, the treasurer, the auditor, the district attorney, the sheriff, all of those positions. The mayor really is the glue that keeps all of that together and working with those entities. The mayor and the council are the only two policy-making elected officials in the county, but they work very closely with all of the others to make sure that whatever policies are decided upon are enacted. And then all of the others can also provide input to the mayor and the council as they're making policy decisions. So it's actually a very important position. The county government is probably the most significant influencer on quality of life in Salt Lake County. And the mayor, being the mayor of the largest county in the state, is technically the second highest executive position in the state. It's actually a pretty big role that a lot of people just are not very familiar with.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't realize that Salt Lake County, until I talked to you, had that type of system. That's unusual for a county, but it makes sense with how big Salt Lake County is. I also didn't realize you went to Georgetown Law School. I also went to Georgetown Law School probably way before you. And then I moved to Boston afterwards. So we had parallel tracks there. And I also was like, yeah, no, I love Boston, but no, thank you. I don't want to live here forever. I think I was driving through those snow-laden cow trails in my Honda Civic. I was like, no, this isn't going to work out.
Winters in
bigger roads.
Oh my gosh. People had told me, be prepared for the winters in Boston. And I was like, what are you talking about? I'm from Utah.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it's a very different kind of winter there.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I'm excited that you are running for the county mayor. Have you run for office before? Is this your first time campaigning?
Yeah, so I have run for office before. 2 years ago, I ran for U.S. House in the 2nd Congressional District here in Utah. I mentioned earlier that when I moved back in 2019, going through that 2020 election cycle, feeling really frustrated with what was going on in the country, even here in the state, that's a lot of kind of what inspired me to jump into that seat. And one of the things that got me there, a lot of people talk about how multiple people came up to them and said, hey, I want you to run for office. Would you consider running for this office? That was not my story. I wanted to do it. I felt driven to do it myself. And there have been times where I thought, wait a minute, why weren't all these people asking me to run? But you don't always need that. And everyone has their own path to it. And for me, I felt like I wanted to do something. Like I said, I felt compelled to step up and try. And one of the biggest things that I was afraid of was what happens if you lose and what happens to your future in politics if you run a race and you don't win. And that really was holding me back. And I was attending the political development series with the Women's Leadership Institute. And one of the speakers there addressed that, not knowing that this was a huge concern of mine, and said, I have run for office before. I didn't win. In fact, I came in almost dead last. But through that, I ran a good campaign and I got noticed by other people. And it turned into this incredible professional opportunity that I never would have had if I hadn't run. And it just gave me permission to try, right? And to say, okay, you can put yourself out there. And as long as you run a good, clean race, even if you lose, there will be other opportunities that come your way. And that was very much the case for me. And so even though I didn't win in the 2nd Congressional District race, I did actually win in Salt Lake County. And that was something that a lot of people took notice of. And so as I was talking to my team after that election was over and trying to figure out, do I run again? Where could my talents be best used? How do I go out there and still try and make a difference like I felt the need to do for so long? And that's where the county started to come into play a little bit. And then I started to have people come to me and say, hey, we noticed you in this race. You did very well in this race. Would you consider running for Salt Lake County mayor? We desperately need a change there. And you're the right person for that job. One thing I would say, just unsolicited advice, if there is anyone out there who's running and who's nervous about that same thing, about what happens if you lose, just make sure you go run a really good, clean campaign, and you never know what can happen with it. And even coming out of that race, so I ran against Chris Stewart in the primary 2 years ago. We very intentionally kept it clean. I did not want to go after him personally. And he took notice of that. And so this year, when I decided to run for county mayor, I went back to him and said, look, I know this is highly unusual, but I'd like to ask you for your endorsement and for your support in my county mayor race. And he said, yeah, this is a really unusual conversation, but you know what? You ran a good campaign. You ran a clean campaign. I was really impressed. You clearly have a future in this, and I'd be happy to support you. So he has come out and endorsed me in the race, even though we were opponents 2 years ago in the primary election.
That is such a cool story. I don't think I've ever heard of that really happening, that your former opponent endorses you in another race. That just speaks very highly of the type of race that you ran, that you and Representative Stewart were able to keep it clean and be dignified in your discussion and not go for the throat, like is so common in politics now. So That's great. And thank you for talking about what happens when you lose. Because I do think that is something that a lot of people are afraid of, and they're afraid to jump in because they don't know what happens if they lose. Do they have to just hang their head in shame and slink away? But that's not at all the case when you lose a race. And most people lose their first race. It's not common to win the first time you run, right?
No, that's very true. And you meet so many incredible people along the way. And so this time around, I have so many more relationships that are deeper and richer than the first time that I ran, and relationships within the party and relationships with other elected officials and with others in the community. And now, again, it's not fun to lose. I'll tell you that from personal experience, but there are just some really incredible things that can come out of it. And the world of people who have run for office is pretty small if you really think about it. And so you are able to meet other people. And if you just keep in mind that this is not about burning bridges, this is about building bridges and working with other people. Politics is a relationship business, and you've got to remember that as a candidate as much as you do an elected official.
And our dialogue would be so much better in politics if everyone kept that in mind who's running, right? If they thought, okay, I don't want to burn bridges, because it seems like these days there's a lot of bridge burning going on. I appreciate that perspective a lot. So how did you build your team? Both first running for Congress, just right out the gate, having no real experience in this. And then now, after having run a race, how did you build up your mayoral team?
My family's not a political family. No one in my extended family has really been involved in anything like this before. So I didn't have a lot of built-in friends or a real built-in network that was already in this business. And others do, and that's great when you have that, but you also don't necessarily need it to get started. A lot of it was organic networking, calling people and saying, hey, can I go to lunch with you? Hey, can I ask you questions? How do I find people? Who can I talk to about this? And I actually ended up so I've got some general consultants that worked with me on my congressional race and are working with me on my mayoral race. And I ended up finding them through LinkedIn, of all places. I realized pretty quickly into my congressional race that I was going to need some support, and I wasn't getting quite the support that I needed. So I went online to LinkedIn and I just typed in political consultants in Utah, and they were one of the ones that came up. And I reached out and set up an interview with them and really liked what they had to say and found them that way. So a lot of it is organic. Sometimes it's luck, but you just have to go out there and find it and look for the people who can help you with the race you're running. If you're running a school board race, if you're running a city council race, if you're running a legislative race, if you're running a congressional race or a federal race, those are very different kinds of races. And finding the people who can help you for the stage of race that you're running is really critical, because the bigger the race, the bigger the stakes, and the more significant the consequences to every decision that you make. I knew that, which is why I wanted some people to help me. So anyway, they helped me on my congressional race, and then they had worked on a few races with a guy who had managed several other races. And so they introduced me to him, and he's my campaign manager for this particular race. So that's my core team. We have a bunch of volunteers as well that are helping us with different things, but that's my core.
To pay consultants and to pay these people, you obviously have to do fundraising. How has fundraising been for you? How have you learned how to do that? Or maybe it came easily to you. What was that process like? Because that scares a lot of people. People say, I don't want to ask people for money.
I don't think fundraising comes very naturally to anybody. So if you feel like fundraising is not a natural skill set, you're probably in the vast majority of people who feel that way. It doesn't mean it's not a skill that can't be learned. And for me, in my congressional race, I learned very quickly that, okay, we need a lot of money and I had to pay these people. And if I was going to sign these agreements, then I needed to be able to own up to that. Sometimes that's actually really helpful. One of the things they talk about in entrepreneurship is that if you don't have a plan B, sometimes it actually helps you make your plan A work, because you're more incentivized to put the effort in if the stakes are a little bit higher. And I think that's true for fundraising, right? I had been given some very good advice early on to never put my own money into the race. And I think that's really good advice for first-time candidates. Do not go into it with the assumption that you're going to fund your own campaign. And I know there are a lot of problems with our fundraising mechanisms here in the country, but the one thing I have learned and have a new appreciation for is that fundraising really is a good indicator of how strong a candidate you are. And if you cannot adequately convey your message to a donor such that they will give you money. And it can be $5, it can be $5,000. The amount almost is irrelevant. But if people are not willing to invest in you, you're either not adequately conveying that message or you're not in the right race. And those are really important things to figure out, because every time somebody donates to you, it's an investment in your success as a candidate. And I harp on this message a lot now, that candidates just need to get comfortable with the fact that they're going to have to fundraise, because it's such an important indicator. You look at Michael Bloomberg's presidential race, right? He funded that whole thing by himself and did not go anywhere with it. He came in like dead last. So you can have trillions of dollars under your belt. It does not mean you're going to win a race. One of the things I also learned is you just have to have no shame when it comes to fundraising. I do a lot of things with friends and family where I'll prep them for the call and say, okay, just so you know, I will be calling and asking you for a donation. And I do it in a way to try and get a laugh out of them, but also to let them know that, no, I really am going to call you and ask for this donation. So they're not surprised by it. Because again, most of my family and friends have never done this before. They're not used to donating to candidates. And a lot of people are in that boat. And it still terrifies my mother to death every time I ask her for a phone number for someone. And she just really struggles with that. But she also knows what I'm trying to do and sees what I'm trying to do. So you just have to set aside your own shame and say, look, I've got to ask. You can tell me no, but I feel really strongly about this. And I'd love to have your support in the process, because I think I can win and I think I can do a really good job. And people see that, they know it, and they want to help. They want to be on your team.
One thing that I feel like, especially with the Latter-day Saint community, is a lot of them haven't given political contributions. And you almost have to educate them on why they need to give political contributions. I don't know if you found that at all.
No, I think that's true. And especially in Utah, our races are relatively inexpensive compared to other races across the country. I think that speaks to, in some ways, the frugality of Utah. But yes, again, like in the Salt Lake County mayor's race, the mayor represents 1.2 million people in Salt Lake County. That's a massive number of people. It's bigger than a congressional race in Utah. And because of that, how do I get to those 1.2 million people, right? How do I get to them to let them know that I'm running, to help them see my message, to understand what it is I'm trying to accomplish for the county? There's no possible way that I can sit down individually with all 1.2 million people and have that kind of conversation. So the only way you do it is through outreach. And a lot of that is through advertising, commercials, digital ads, all that kind of stuff. And those take money. And so we talk a lot about needing good candidates to be in office and needing good people in office. That means that we collectively as a society have to support the good people who are running, because there are a lot of good people who are out there trying to do good things. And if we're not willing to support them in their candidacy, then it's hard to complain about the people who end up there at the end of the day.
Well, and a lot of time in the way our media works these days, it's the most, not just who are very loud or vocal or extreme who are getting the media attention, right? And so if you're not that candidate, you almost need more money because you're not going to get the free press. You have to buy the eyeballs that are seeing you. So it is, I agree completely. It's really important if you see a good candidate in a race and to look for those good candidates to support them financially.
Absolutely.
So you're on the board of Utah Women Run. And so I'm assuming you guys talk a lot about why women don't run and how to get more women to run. Why do you think more women should run for office, and why don't they, especially Latter-day Saint women?
I think, like I said at the beginning, it took me a very long time to step into this because it's scary. It really is scary. And we talk a lot about how women need to know all the details, the ins and outs before they're willing to step into something. And you look at job applications, and if women are 80% qualified, they still won't apply. And if men are 50% qualified, they will. And again, for me, having that permission to lose, that was the real trigger for me, because I felt like I had to have everything figured out. I had to have the perfect race. I had to have the perfect opportunity and everything already lined up with a guaranteed win before I could step into this. You are literally never, ever going to get that. And so if that's what you're waiting for, you're never going to get involved in this, right? So I think that's part of it. I think that we are not used to seeing a lot of women in political positions in Utah. So for a lot of women, I think they just don't even think about the fact that they could run. And that's something that we also need to change. And I love the fact that we have a woman in Congress now representing us in Celeste Malloy. She's great and she's doing a fantastic job back there. we need to become more comfortable seeing that, which again is why we need to be willing to support each other. And it doesn't mean that you support someone just because they're a woman, but finding good candidates, encouraging them to run. I have friends who I can see the potential in them for good candidates. And so I'm just putting that out there. One day you're going to run and I'm going to help you and we're going to work through this together. And I want you to be thinking about it because it might take you several years before you really come around to that idea. But civic responsibility and civic engagement are very much parts of our culture as Latter-day Saints. We just don't always take it to the step of running for office.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like how you are telling your friends long-term plan, right? That they might need to run for office, because I do think it takes a lot of us years to mull that over and decide, okay, now is the time to go. And especially women, they say they need to be told 7 times to run. And that obviously wasn't the case with you, which I think is fantastic. I wish more women would just put themselves out there without waiting for someone to ask them or beg them to run. But I think one thing that we can do if we want more women to run is to just start prepping them, start telling them that'd be a good candidate, start getting it in their heads that yeah, maybe one day they should do this. Have you faced much negative campaigning in this election? And if so, how do you deal with that? Especially like the online anger and rage. And I'm sure you get comments attacking you for positions or maybe even personally. So tell me how that's been and how you deal with it.
Yeah, you definitely get it. I will say that someone gave me some advice that the more you're attacked, the more legitimate people think you are as a candidate. So in some ways, take that as a good sign, right? If people don't think that you're worth the time, they're not going to bother going after you. Sometimes you have to remember that. And my team is constantly telling me, Erin, stay off social media. Do not look at what other people are doing. Never, ever read the comments ever on anything. And I just let my team handle all of that. And if there's something that I need to be aware of, they can tell me. But otherwise, I try and just stay away from it as much as possible. That doesn't mean you're not going to get it. And there are a lot of things, especially if you don't have much of a political background, there are a lot of things that people will go after you for personally, just because there's nothing else they can really use. And John Curtis told me one time that when he first ran for Congress, I think it was Congress, people made fun of the way he tucked in his shirt. Just very, why do people care about that? But it was a thing and he had to figure out how to deal with it. For me, one of the things that comes up in strange ways is the fact that I'm single. I don't have children. I'm not married. And that's been something that's been, a challenge in my life, especially as a Latter-day Saint woman. And so sometimes I think people are well-meaning, but I'll frequently get the comment of, oh, are you married? Do you have kids? And I'll say, no, I have an adorable puppy, but I'm not married, no kids. And then they'll say something along the lines of, oh, that's good. It means you can really focus on the job. I always know that they mean well, but it's just one of those comments where you're like, do you really hear what you're saying there? Do you really hear what you're saying? And so there are things like that can come up, and it comes from both sides of the political aisle. So that is not a partisan comment in any way, shape, or form. And it's not a gender comment. I get it from men and women. It's kind of a universal thing. I'm fully prepared for the negative stuff to hit. The harder the race is, the more you're going to get it. And you just have to roll with it. Thick skin is a real thing in politics. And you've got to have your base, whether it's your family, your friends, whoever it is who you can go to and say, okay, I need to set politics aside. I just need people who love me and care about me for me, and to just walk away from this for the time being. And again, my team is really great at helping me with that. And so having support systems go a long way when you get the negative comments.
Absolutely. So what have you found to be really important in being a candidate? What skills or things that you have learned how to do or know how to do have helped you? And what advice would you give to others about what skills they need to develop to run for office?
Yeah, I know that others who've been on your podcast have said this before, but you have to be willing to work hard. This is not an easy thing in any way, shape, or form. And no matter what race you're running, at what level, it's going to be tough. And you have to be willing to put in the time and the effort to do it. I talk to people who want to run and they're kind of like, well, I can do it on the weekends or in between other things. That's great, but don't expect to win, right? Like doesn't mean you have to give all of your time all the time, but you have to be willing to put in the work. So that's part of it. My team would joke a lot during my congressional race that they were like, Erin, you're one of the hardest working candidates we've ever seen. And for me, I thought, well, this is actually quite easy. But coming from working in these large law firms where you're billing hours constantly and you're on all the time, it was a very natural step into campaigning. So I was very grateful for that because I already had that ready to go. And for a lot of people, I do think that's a shock when they get into this and realize how difficult it is and how much effort you have to put in. So just be prepared for that. Again, have no shame. You're out there to send a message and to share a message. Go share it. Don't be shy. Don't hide behind your own insecurities about it. People will rally behind you when they see your confidence and when they see your passion about what you're doing. Whether or not they ultimately agree with you, people like to see that you're passionate about it and they want to support people and candidates who are passionate. So let that passion shine through. And then we've already talked about fundraising. I could talk about that all day long and the importance of fundraising. The other thing I'll say is be strategic about finding a race that you can win. It doesn't mean that you have to have a guaranteed win, right? It's different. It's like I was talking about earlier, but running for the sake of running is not necessarily going to get you a win. If you pick a strategic race where you have a shot at it, even if you don't ultimately win, you set yourself apart as a very serious, thoughtful candidate. And that's how you get the opportunities down the road. Before you go into any race, make sure you're talking to people, make sure you're getting advice, make sure you're asking for suggestions along the way. And if the race you want to run is not the right race to run, be prepared to make that decision, because putting yourself out there just for the sake of doing it may end up hurting you in the long run.
You mentioned like talking to people and getting the information. What did you do before you ran for both races you've been in to prep yourself? And especially for Congress, because that was your first race and you didn't have a lot of political experience before that. So how did you educate yourself and what did you do?
There are a lot of great organizations out there, Project Elect being one, Utah Women Run, the Women's Leadership Institute. There's several here in Utah that will help train women to run for office. I went to all of those trainings, everything I could get my hands on to make sure I understood. If that was my barrier, that it was overwhelming, I was going to take down that barrier by educating myself. So I took advantage of all of those programs. And then for the mayoral race in particular, there are a lot of really important issues at the county level. And I wanted to make sure I understood those issues as much as possible. So I've had a lot of conversations with members of the county council, others who work in the county government, legislators who have to work closely with the county government, city mayors, city council members, right? Just a lot of conversations to say, tell me about the issues that you face when working with the county. How do we make those better? What are the things that are causing you pain points? And for Congress, it was a little bit different because I had worked in the Senate. I understood the national issues in a little different form. For the county, that was different. So depending on the race you're running, make sure you understand the issues that are pertinent to that. And I see this all the time from voters. They'll ask me questions that I would have no control over as a county mayor. And I get a lot of questions about education. The county doesn't have anything to do with education. And so some of it is just make sure you know what those issues are. Because if you're running for county mayor, but your entire platform is education, there's a mismatch between what you're doing and people are going to notice and you're not going to look like a very serious candidate. You know, it's also a great way to build relationships.
I like how you went around and talked to different stakeholders and figured out the pain points, because that's really what you have to do. And also, I do feel like some people run for an office like county and don't realize that there's no education in it. So that just goes back to your point of making sure you're running for an office you can win, and also one that aligns with your passions and your interests. If the only issue you care about is education, you need to find out what offices actually have some control over education, right? And what would actually move the needle in education if you were to get elected, because it's very hard to talk passionately about something if there's nothing you can do once you get elected, right?
Yes, absolutely. And then it just looks like a power grab. And that's not what these are supposed to be. These are public service offices. You're there to provide a service. And if you don't know what services need to be provided, and you don't need to know everything as a candidate, you're not going to. There's no way to really peer behind the curtain of an organization that you're not a part of yet. So you do the best you can. You learn from the stakeholders that are involved. And that's really all you need to know as a candidate. But you've got to know why you're there. And you've got to know what your message is. Otherwise, again, you're probably not going to win.
You've had quite the immersion in campaigning in the past 2 years, right? Running for Congress and now running for Salt Lake County Mayor. Looking back 2 years ago, what advice would you give yourself, or would you give someone just starting out about running for office in this whole process?
Yeah. So I'll kind of reiterate a couple things I've said before. One, find the team who can help you run the race that you want to win. That's really key. Your best friend might be the best volunteer, but they may not be the best campaign manager if you're looking at a race that is a little bit more substantial. And second piece, be prepared to fundraise. We've talked about this a lot, but just be prepared for that and figure out how to make it something that you can do, because you're going to need to do it no matter what. And then I had someone give me some advice. We had our county convention here a few weeks ago, and I was working on my speech with somebody, and she gave me some advice and said, before you go on stage, just take a minute and stand there and appreciate the fact that you're there. Because again, not very many people ever get to that point. And to be there, to have that moment, to realize what you have accomplished to that point, whatever happens afterward, that's a really big deal. And candidates should be very proud of the fact that they have gone that far and gone through one of these races. It's a real trial by fire. So I've shared that with a lot of other candidates and said, look, no matter what, just appreciate the fact that you're doing this, find the joy in it, and just be proud of what you have accomplished, because it's such an unusual thing to go do. And take the time to enjoy the moments, because it goes very fast. It goes very fast and very slow sometimes, but it does go very fast. And by the time it's over, you want to be able to look back and reflect and appreciate those moments where you connect with a voter. You have that moment, you're standing there giving a speech and you feel yourself on fire because you are hitting exactly the points that you need to talk about. And you know you're connecting with that audience. All of those things are just really incredible once in a lifetime opportunities. Just make sure you enjoy them and you notice them when they come.
My last question is always, do you have an invitation for our listeners, something that they can do today or this week to get more involved in community service and public service and civically engaged?
If you want to get involved and you're just unsure of where to start, go do something. Find something that can help you start to break down those barriers that stand in your own way. Whether it's coming to a training with Utah Women Run or Project Elect, whether it's calling somebody. I was very impressed when I ran for Congress, how many people were willing to talk to me as a potential candidate, even other members of Congress, people in the state legislature. People are not as hard to get a hold of as you think they are. And people really do want to help good candidates. So just go have a conversation with someone. Just start somewhere, break it down into small bite-sized chunks and start to tear down those walls, because we need you to get involved and we want to help you along the way.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Erin. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, and good luck in the rest of your campaign.
All right. Thank you so much, Audrey. It's been great to be here.
Thank you all for listening to the Project Elected podcast. For free resources and materials, head over to projectelectwomen.org. We're also on Instagram and Facebook as Project Elect Women. We'd love for you to subscribe, rate us, or give us a review on iTunes. So until next time, thank you.